The interesting thing to me about gentrification is that on the bare bones surface of it, you're talking about income, more or less, income and wealth coming into an area that was previously underserved, not as well equipped, or just not as many resources. And with this influx of wealth and the demographics that are starting to live there, and with the businesses, you have this shift where the lower income populations who have ridden out a lot of the hardships, the crime, the turbulent days, and have stayed loyal in trying to maintain place as much as possible, are now no longer able to benefit from the change that's coming. Now that's the pure income, socioeconomic factors behind gentrification. What's even more fascinating to me is the sociocultural element that tends to accompany that, where you have, with this influx of wealth, it tends to be in the form of more white people and white businesses that wouldn't necessarily cater to the typically low-income black populations that were there before. And so what I find fascinating is that even myself, for example, college educated, first generation black woman, coming into an area like this, I would, on the bare bones of gentrification, be classified as a black gentrifier. But the difference is that I probably would still frequent the beauty supply store, up the block, or, get my hero chips or whatever from this corner store. And so there are things that, even though I'd be coming in with a certain level of wealth, that would sort of put me out of place with the rest of the population. In terms of the community dynamic, I would still more or less blend in. Whereas what happens when you have a lot of white people come into an area, there are different services and different tastes. So, now you have wine parlors. The deli corner store has craft beer all of a sudden. In the corner we saw that a Starbucks is coming. That tends to be a big indicator. Then the yoga spots. And so, not to say that black people wouldn't frequent these areas, these establishments, but the character changes. And so with the positive change, everyone wants change, but with the positive changes that come, you have to wonder, change for who? And the challenge is that the who is typically not the folks that were here and that have wanted opportunity all along, but were never given that chance. But when you think about it, spatial violence, if you're talking about, the legacy in this country of New York, where you've had land either taken away from folk outright or, taken for pennies, New York was colonized by the Dutch, and they really just snatched up the land from the Native American population that was here prior. There has been this legacy of spatial violence that spans centuries. The question about policing and gentrification, for me, I got to start with policing in communities of color, the historical, I wouldn't even call it relationship, but dysfunction that has existed for as long as I can remember. I mean, just recently in Staten Island, Eric Garner, a man unarmed, just got choked to death by police who were quote unquote trying to arrest him. For what violation, we don't know. But what we do know is that a black man is dead unnecessarily. Jane Jacobs, one of the biggest influencers on urban planning, talks about the eyes on the street. So in neighborhoods, organically, you'll have more people out. The shopkeeper will know, the person that's frequenting the store. These types of relationships that are sort of organic, but that form in certain communities, but where you'll have people hanging out on the stoop because there is no backyard or park, and that's their way of engaging, sharing news and such. It becomes loitering, So behaviors start to get licensed. The drumming circles in the park, where that's a culture that's brought over from a lot of West African traditions and even Caribbean traditions, becomes noise violations. And so, again, the socioeconomic component to gentrification is one thing, but the sociocultural monitoring of behavior or change in behaviors, what's acceptable behavior versus not, is also an interesting thing that comes into play.